Hello there, and welcome to this special interest session today on linking the environment, economy and well-being into business and policy decision-making. My name's Dawn Scott. I manage the SWEET programme here at the University of Exeter, which you'll hear more about later, and I'll be your chair for today. As you know, today's session is part of the University of Exeter's Green Futures Conference, which is focused on developing solutions to some of the most pressing global challenges. And today during the session today, we're going to explore the solutions that can help simultaneously deliver economic growth, social gains and environmental improvements. The Green Futures campaign at the university is just kicking off now as the G7 leaders meet in Cornwall. So just to give you an idea of the structure of the session today, we will start with short introductory presentations from each of our speakers, followed by a Q&A session. We will then allow for a short comfort break, which should be around 12 o'clock. You'll be able to ask questions to the speakers using the Slido function. So please feel free to start putting questions in to the speakers and to the panel whenever you're ready. You don't need to wait to the end of the talks. And you can also upvote other people's questions that you particularly like. And just to remind you today that the session will be recorded and it will be available for viewing on the Green Futures website at a future date. So without further ado, our first speaker today is Matt Hurd from the National Trust. Matt is a terrestrial ecologist by training and is the National Specialist in Land Use and Ecosystem Services. Matt is also an honorary professor at the University of Exeter, and we are particularly pleased to welcome Matt today due to our recently established strategic partnership we have between the university and the National Trust, which I'm sure Matt will tell you more about shortly. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Dawn, and welcome everyone to my office in East Devon. It's great to be with you today. I'm talking on behalf of the National Trust, and for those that don't know, a little bit of background really is that it's Europe's largest conservation organisation. It was founded over 125 years ago to kind of preserve historic and green spaces, and the original intent was for everyone's enjoyment, refreshment and rest, and really that original intent is still massively relevant and needed more now than ever. So we're a large organisation. We're the largest private landowner in the UK. We've got about 250,000 hectares of land. We steward about 780 kind of miles of coastline and a number of listed buildings. And within that space, we look after some really significant nature, and that's linked to special scientific interest, particularly our priority habitats and species and areas of outstanding natural beauty. And we cover England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and that significant biodiversity scans across there, and we look after some really significant landscapes too. We've got over 5 million members, and on average in normal times we'd get about 26 million visitors per annum, so a lot of people are engaging with our spaces, and we're really lucky to be able to also draw on a massive volunteer force of over 60,000 volunteers. So really the scale of the National Trust spans across landscapes, properties, a number of tenants and a really diverse business portfolio. And that creates a really diverse, complex and multifaceted organisation that has to underpin lots of its decision making with the environmental goods and services. And really our core purpose is about preserving and sharing that beauty and heritage and nature for everyone. So relevant to today's proceedings really is recognising the challenge and addressing the linked nature crisis and the climate change are key parts of our current and also our long-term strategy, and those things are kind of tandem and interlinked. We understand, you know, and the climate signals that we're seeing, the declines in UK biodiversity that match declines elsewhere, and the shifting kind of environmental hazards, as you can see on the right. The implications for that, for the role and status, how we manage this business are really critical, and we've got reflecting our sort of greater awareness and urgency to act. And I guess the National Trust has embedded some of this thinking over the last decades and is seeking to accelerate those. Really delivering our core purpose and sticking to our core purpose means that we have to necessarily bridge across sectors, and it really needs a joined up approach, both internally and with our external partners. So we recognise the challenge, we're trying to tackle the challenge, and that really is shaping and informing how we act. So in broad terms, in terms of tackling this, the first element is about reducing, especially our carbon emissions and negative impacts. We can look at this in terms of a number of aspects. We've made an overt commitment to be net zero by 2030. That involves switching kind of our investment portfolio, divesting from fossil fuels into more renewable sources. Detailed work on and modelling, understanding kind of what the carbon balance is across both our land and also our businesses, and plotting future trajectories and understanding scenarios to how we're going to strategically tackle those things. We've already made considerable investments in renewable energies and highlighting kind of where that's best placed, and also efficiency investments across our portfolio. And we're already 50% reliant on renewable energy. And then there's a bit of this that is about exploring viable alternatives to transportation, to the way we do things on properties and our land. So in hand with kind of understanding sources and looking at kind of opportunities to reduce those impacts, we're also looking at large suites of adaptation. We're really facing into the reality of environmental change by accounting for those impacts in all the decisions we make. And these have to be based on evidence. We're developing predictive hazard mapping so that we can understand under future climate scenarios where and how properties and land may be affected. We're actively seeking to manage biotic risks, things like cholera in ash dieback, in ensuring people are safe, but also understanding how we may be able to mitigate the dynamics of those threats. We're already adapting our properties sympathetically and often using historical precedents, as you can see down the bottom, relying on kind of old technology as well as new. And also we're modelling and understanding the impacts of on our properties and visitors, because that's obviously a key part of our business, to stay open and allow people to access the spaces that we provide. And as well as adapting and reducing, we also want to help start mitigating some of those effects. And that's based around our land use, understanding where and how to implement nature-based solutions, and looking at kind of wider landscape scale renovation, both on our land and in partnership beyond. And that's to build really this ecosystem resilience and ensure we're trying to deliver multiple benefits. We've already committed to planting 20 million trees by 2030 as a part of our net zero commitments. We're already trying to protect and restore thousands of hectares of peatland to kind of ensure that those fluxes from those damaged environments are reduced and actually are reversed. We have massive programs about renovating and creating habitats. We've already committed to 25,000 hectares of habitat restored by 2025. We have major river restoration program that's looking at whole catchments, and we're using kind of novel techniques and species introductions, so beavers for natural flood management. And alongside that, obviously, a lot of our land is currently used for farming, and we explore kind of the way of innovating and more holistically approaching kind of nature-friendly, more sustainable agroecological approaches to farming, from use of robotics through to kind of GIS and satellite tagged cattle and grazing, through to kind of holistic management of swards and way we might defray crops. And ultimately, the key thing that we want to do is make sure that we're fully engaged with our external partners, but also our visitors and our members. That's building both to facilitate and link initiatives to build that evidence base through research and collaboration, and also inspire people and allow them access. So shared land management practices that allow us to work beyond our boundaries, developing evidence and research. We became an IRO, an independent research organisation in 2019, and we have an active research strategy. We have a culture of innovation and seek those collaborations to look at that. We want to connect and allow access to the communities, and we also have a very strong policy and advocacy. So that leads us on to probably why I'm here today, really, is because we're really excited about a recent advance in this and our partnership with the University of Exeter. This is based around kind of the ideas of landscape stewardship and ecological citizenship. And this is going to be explored and is already explored through a number of sub-themes about delivering multiple benefits and how we reconnect cultural and natural landscapes, managing those changing landscapes alongside the things I've already talked about, and that bit about reconnecting people with landscapes and how that affects health, well-being, and the participation of people in that process. And ultimately, what we're seeking to do more holistically across the piece is really join up landscapes for people and nature. We want to create more opportunities for a range of people to visit, stay, and understand and experience our land. We want thriving species that are able to move and adapt to response to environmental change. We want to play our part in combating climate change and protect our natural assets and historic features. And really, to do that, we need to draw on the widest pool of resources, both internally and externally, and seek that partnership to facilitate and underpin that decision making that we've got to do. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Matt. That was a really great overview of the perspective from the National Trust. And as I said before, if you've got any specific questions for Matt, please start posing them on the Slido, and we'll get to them at the after the presentations. Okay, so our next speaker is Ian Bateman. He's a professor of environmental economics at the University of Exeter. Ian is the director of SWEEP and LEAP. LEAP stands for the Land, Environment, Economics and Policy Institute. Ian, please take the stage.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Great to be here. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about the role that economics might play in helping to save the world. Obviously, economics has played a pretty full role in actually making things worse, but I'm arguing that we can actually improve things as well. Now, to do this, we need a balanced view. So we need to recognise that economic growth has actually generated a lot of benefits over time. So, for example, these little dots here tell you about the distribution of countries on two axes, life expectancy and income. And what you can see that both life expectancy and income have increased quite dramatically over the last 100, 120 years. That doesn't mean that everybody has a good life expectancy or a good income, but certainly as a whole, the planet's population has actually benefited from this growth. So we don't want to throw that upside away. However, there's been some very serious downsides, problems like global warming, biodiversity loss, and long-term degradation of nature's capital, the variety of natural resources that underpin life and well-being. Basically, we have achieved all that growth and improvement by running down nature's capital. And it's reached a point which we can't carry on living like this. We need to address these problems. And to do this, we need to recognise that these are complex problems and they will often not be solved by simple, even simplistic answers. So the prevalence of advice to simply go out and plant a tree, while welcome, isn't really sufficient to actually address the problems that we have in the world. Instead, we have to recognise the number of drivers that change our land use So policy, markets, and environment all combine together to actually determine what the land use is. And that land use generates a whole range of values for us. Some of these are passed through markets and generally called private goods, but there's a huge range of public goods which we don't pay for in markets, but actually determine an awful lot of social value. This thing called the natural capital approach is really an attempt to try and bring all of these factors together and introduce them into decision making. So getting away from very simplistic approaches to addressing what are actually complex problems. We've made a lot of advances in this. So, for example, we now have a good understanding of how land use responds to changes in those drivers, such as the environment, policy, and markets, and we can predict change pretty well. And because of that, we can forecast responses to likely future change. So, for example, we know that in a country like the UK, summer temperatures are going to go up and growing season rainfall is likely to fall. This is going to result in quite dramatic changes in land use. So, for example, if we look at these two exemplar land uses, cereals and beef, you can see that as time passes, we're going to see more and more intensive cereal production, actually pushing out other types of agriculture. Now, while that might be good if you're a farmer, because those cereals are actually higher profit, there's going to be some serious consequences elsewhere in the environment. A switch into high cereal production means a lot more fertilizers being used and therefore a lot more pollution going into rivers, which in turn means some pretty serious negative impacts upon the ecology of waterways. And that in turn is going to affect our well-being. It's going to mean that certain prices go up. It also means that some of those important non-market values are going to decline. These changes, such as climate change, are going to affect all aspects of the environment and production. So, for example, we're going to see significant changes in the growth of trees across the country. And we need to factor that into our decision making now. So, for example, some of the more exotic conifers that we've brought in from other countries over the years are actually going to decline into the future, whereas species such as oak are actually going to perform better. Every time we change land use, we also change our emissions to the atmosphere. And this happens in multiple ways because of what we plant, how we plant it, how that land use actually emits greenhouse gases itself. And of course, we have a big influence on this through our choices about diet. And what we find is that generally, quite a lot of agriculture is a high emission industry. And switching some of it into forestry would be a useful idea. Not in all areas. There are some areas when planting trees would actually be really bad for the atmosphere, for example, because they might dry out peatlands and emit large amounts of greenhouse gases. And of course, we have to make absolutely sure that we are still producing sufficient food. Otherwise, we'll just import it from elsewhere, for example, Amazonian beef, and that would actually make things worse, not better. Also, we need to incorporate impacts upon biodiversity. So as land use changes, this can have very dramatic impacts upon biodiversity. All of these things now have to be brought together. And to do this, we've worked with the government and actually developed a series of land use decision support tools, such as this one here called NEV and NEVO. This allows you to look at any area of the country. You can look at the whole country, or you can zoom down to very small areas, subcatchments, that sort of stuff. And in each one, you can find out what's going on across a range of activities and values. including farming, including the water environment, but also including forestry, greenhouse gases, impacts on flora and fauna, and recreation. Now, to finish, I just want to show you how this changes decisions. So one of the issues that we've been looking at is, where should Britain plant those new forests that have been promised as a response to climate change and to deliver net zero? Well, you can look at this in two ways. First of all, you could just leave this to the market. You could put a lot of money on the table and just see who actually decides to take those subsidies. In this case, then all that will really be driving that is the amount of subsidy and how much people like farmers or landowners will have to give up in terms of things like food production values. But most other things won't actually have an impact on that. If you do that, then these are the locations you'd expect that planting to occur. And actually, a lot of these locations are really poor in terms of the wider values and benefits that they generate. So, for example, a lot of these areas are peatlands, and so you're probably going to actually emit more carbon and methane than you actually store. Also, they're miles away from where most people live, so you're not going to get much recreation value. And in fact, when we add up the values of all of the benefits and costs generated by this scheme, we find out it's really poor value. We'd be better not planting these sorts of forests. But there is another approach, this natural capital approach, which I'm very pleased to say is now part of the Treasury's guidelines on how you should appraise projects. Here you look at all of the wider values of this land use change. Many of those actually you can value in money terms. Some of them you can't, but you can apply other rules. For example, biodiversity, you can make sure that these forests that you plant deliver a net gain in biodiversity. If you do that, you don't plant in the same place. You plant in very different locations, away from peat soils, so that actually you're capturing carbon out of the atmosphere, near to cities, where you're generating lots of recreation value, and also in places that are good for water quality, good for biodiversity. When you now value those things that you can, you find that you're generating very large benefits for society from these activities. Pleased to say that this approach is now making its mark on government policy, both environmental policy and, as I mentioned, the Treasury's guidance upon how to appraise decisions in public spending. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you, and I look forward to answering questions. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ian, for a very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. We were due to go to Grace Twiston Davis next, but I think we've lost her video, so we're going to jump to Ben Barmford instead, if that's okay. So Ben is a final year PhD student here at the university, focusing on designing mechanisms to improve environmental outcomes. Ben is soon to complete his PhD and has then secured a position at Exeter, funded by Dragon Capital, which is an asset management company looking at the economics of biodiversity. Okay, Ben, do you want to take the stage, please?
Yeah, and thanks very much for that introduction, Dawn. So as Dawn mentioned, I'm a final year PhD student as part of the SWEET project here at the University of Exeter. So I sit in the LEAP mechanism design team, actually. And that's my work there, my PhD, is all about how we design these schemes that Ian was just talking about that are going to pay people to change their land use. And of course, Ian was there describing the value side, what the ecosystem services are worth. But another kind of side of that whole problem is the costs that these farmers face. And you do need to know something about that in order to work out how much you should be paying these people to change their behaviours, which will deliver different services. Just to highlight as well, so as Dawn mentioned, I'm obviously going to go and move on to this Dragon Capital funded postdoc position after completing my PhD. And there we're going to be looking at the different approaches to biodiversity conservation around the world and the different policies that are out there, which of those are working and which maybe need a little bit of improvement, and continuing to work with stakeholders both in the UK and abroad to improve that kind of future policy. As Dawn's kind of mentioned and Ian's further highlighted as well, we're rather keen on partnerships here at the University of Exeter. So I'll be kind of talking mainly about one of those key partnerships today. So that's work with Entrade, who are an organisation who facilitate these land use changes, working to kind of bring together the funding side that wants particular land use changes in particular locations alongside the supply side, the farmers who might be prepared to change their behaviour to improve environmental quality. So that's the kind of area that I'll be focusing on today. And there are two kind of key schemes that we've really worked with them on in the past couple of years. So one of those is the planting of cover crops in the Poole Harbour catchment. There, the planting of cover crops reduces the amount of nitrogen that leaches into the soil and into the watercourse. And so the key problem that Entrade's kind of been facing is how on earth do we set that price? How on earth do we arrive at a price to pay farmers to change their land use, to plant these cover crops? And so we've been kind of offering advice there. The second one that we've been working on is their recently developed Somerset catchment market. And there, rather than nitrogen, it's phosphorus. And in this case, rather than the buyer being the water company, Wessex Water, it's housing developers actually. And so the key problem is how on earth you kind of solve this almost Tetris-like puzzle, if you will. So how on earth you bring together kind of blocky demand amongst housing developers who have particular developments that they want to go ahead and who need phosphorus credits by law to allow them to do so, and farmers who can supply individual fields which can reduce the amount of phosphorus runoff by developing wetlands or woodlands on these particular areas. Obviously, or potentially not, but just to highlight, obviously, these are both kind of regulated industries. So that means that this demand that's coming from the water companies and from the developers that's going to unlock this funding comes about because the government has regulated that they must achieve particular targets, and the cheapest way for them to do so is actually through this change in land use, through kind of unlocking, as Ian's kind of said, the potential of the natural capital kind of approach. So with that kind of brief summary of the work that I'll be kind of talking about, just kind of ends to say that thanks for the opportunity to kind of talk to you, and I'll hand back over to Dawn.
Great, thanks Ben. Okay, so our next speaker is Grace Twiston-Davies. Grace is a Sweep Impact Fellow, specialising in exploring business-led solutions to the pollinator decline. Grace is based at the Environment and Sustainability Institute at our Cornwall campus. And I will now hand over to Grace. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Dawn. Apologies for my internet dropped out just at the wrong moment then, but luckily I've got back just in time. So thank you for that. I work with farmers, landowners, and land managers in the southwest to, as we were saying, and as it says on the slide, to help bring biodiversity back to the farm, and helping farming and landowning businesses to thrive, but hand in hand with nature. So my focus is on pollinators and their habitats, and there's various reasons for this. So firstly, because pollinators are things like bees, butterflies, hoverflies, and beetles in the UK, and they provide absolutely essential economic, environmental, and social services. So they maintain biodiversity, so they give us a healthy environment. They provide pollination services worth £651 million per year in the UK to our economy, and they help to keep our human population healthy because they pollinate nutrient-rich crops. So they're absolutely essential. Secondly, because there's international scientific consensus that pollinators are in decline, so that's a real worry. In the UK, 1 out of 3 wild bee species are in decline, and 1 out of 3 bumblebee species are at risk of extinction in the UK. So there's real concern about that. And then last but not least, one of the main drivers of pollinator declines is habitat loss, and the loss of flower-rich habitats. And this is actually something we can do something about. I mean, then there are other things like climate change and pesticide use and invasive species and diseases. So we have to obviously consider those as well. But habitat loss is something we can all do something about. So it's sort of a good news story of something that we can do. Yeah. So we've been working with farmers and landowners to boost their landscapes of pollinators in ways that also help their farm businesses. So we've sort of got 3 methods or 3 projects to help do this. So one of the things we've been doing on the Sweet project, is we've been co-creating with the farmers and land managers bespoke land management plans that consider what habitats are already on the farms and also what crops they're already growing, because these actually contribute to pollinator health. And then we test out different sort of scenarios or ideas for future land management. So we've been doing this using a tool that we've created called Bee Steward, and this is a software tool that basically takes in farm maps that show where the habitats and crops are, and then it uses those to predict how well that landscape is faring for pollinators, and then how well it might fare into the future. So we can test out lots of different ideas in this sort of virtual safe space with land managers. And one of the key things that absolutely provides win-wins across the board, and it sort of fits in really nicely with what Ben was saying about the cover crops. So I'm really glad I went after Ben this time. So it was luck that the internet went down. Was actually species-rich herbal ley. So they're not necessarily cover crops, but they serve the same sort of purposes. But they sort of have multiple benefits to the farm business. So these are crops of different species of grass and herbs like yarrows and clovers and vetches. And these are brilliant for pollinators because the pollinators have nectar. Butterflies have lots of grasses for their larval host plants. But actually, they absorb lots of carbon, they lock it in. They help stop nitrates coming out of the fields and going into the watercourses. And actually, they're way better for animal health. So the animals are healthier, and the milk and the beef from grazing them is better quality and more nutrient rich. So it's an absolute sort of win-win-win across the board. So that's one of our real key things that ticks all of those boxes. Okay. So sort of actually no, I'll go back to that slide. So results so far is that sort of with these bespoke management plans and looking at these win-wins, we've been able to work across 7,400 hectares of land to help safeguard and enhance what these landowners already have, as well as to create new habitats. So just to put that into context, a hectare is about international rugby pitch size. So 7,400 rugby pitches of land that we're trying to enhance and safeguard for pollinators and those various ecosystem services. And we've also got 545 hectares of brand new habitat specifically for pollinators, either pledged or actually in action on the ground. So like really big, really lovely areas that we've done in collaboration with these landowners. So sort of second, sorry, there we go. Sort of second thing that we've been looking at is wildflower meadows. And the reason for this is that this is a stat that everyone hears time and time again, but we've lost 97% of our wildflower meadows since World War II. And now we might have a little bit more wildflower meadows than that, just because in the last 20 years there's been some regeneration projects, but we've still lost an absolute huge amount, statistically significant amount of wildflower meadow. And that's a real problem for biodiversity. So what we've been doing is working with landowners to create a network of these essential habitats. Because if you just look at bees, they will travel anything from a few hundred meters to a few kilometers just daily to forage or to find mates. So we need this landscape scale approach because they're not going to turn around when they get to the boundary of their pollinator friendly farm. They're going to carry on. So we need to connect them up. So we've been matchmaking sites of existing meadows. So where are there sites of private, really nice private land, really lovely wildflower meadows, and matchmaking them with new sites that want to create and regenerate wildflower meadows. So we've been doing that with Plant Life, the charity Plant Life, as well as the Duchy of Cornwall Estate that own and manage a lot of land in the southwest. So we've been finding these lowland meadow sites, helping to enhance and protect those sites, and then taking the hay from those sites and transplanting it onto brand new sites. So far, we've been able to identify and protect 33 hectares of existing species-rich grassland, And then last year we generated 9 hectares of meadows, which is quite pleasing considering we're in, we had a lockdown and, we just couldn't do the scale that we wanted to last year. So I'm really happy with that, despite the limitations. And this year we've got 38 hectares planned. So we're really ramping this up. I'm really pleased with that one. And then the last but not least area that we're looking at is we're looking at wildflowers as a crop and a business opportunity specifically to grow on farmland through our Wildflower Collective project. So actually, especially in the southwest, the demand for local seed and local plants for habitat regeneration, the public and private sector has absolutely ramped up. There's a huge demand for it because people want it for community green spaces, road verges. Landowners want to create these meadows, farmers want it for countryside stewardship options, estates want to rewild, and businesses want to find new exciting ways to look at these challenges, find solutions to these challenges and create new products and services. So there's a huge opportunity in the south, especially in the southwest. So you've got lots of really lovely habitats and really innovative businesses and landowners. So there's a huge opportunity for business and environmental growth hand in hand in the region. So what we've been looking at is things like growing flowers for the seed for regeneration projects. So we've been working with the National Wildflower Centre, now based at Eden Project, because they're managing quite a lot of these big scale restoration projects, as well as farmers and private landowners looking at things, even simple things like a seed ball, local seed provenance seed balls, seed oils for nutraceuticals, nutrients for human consumption, as well as flower oils for more holistic therapies, and things like natural dye from flowers. So across the board, amazing opportunities there. So we've been bringing all these businesses together to look at these opportunities and look at these opportunities as a way to actually solve this driver of pollinator declines, which is habitat loss. And then with them, we're scoping and piloting and finding ways to make the most of these opportunities. So we've got a lovely example here. So this is a farm on the Roseland in Cornwall. So here they've got 60 hectares of wildflowers. So they've got calendula, which is in the picture there, that's marigold, as well as borage and sunflowers, and they're growing that for the seed oils. And as well as this, we've got a lovely pilot as well, central Cornwall, down the A30, where they're testing to grow 6 hectares of red campion and cornflowers for habitat regeneration. I've saved this one here. So this is one of my favourite projects. So here we've been working with the Lost Gardens of Heligan. So they're a big visitor attraction in the southwest, and here they planted 4.7 hectares of wildflower meadow for a variety of reasons. So as a visitor experience, you can see there's visitors meandering around these paths, around these beautiful wildflower meadows. It's providing absolute, ample pollinator food, as well as capturing carbon, and actually is a business opportunity here for Heligan. So they're now providing seed for the National Wildflower Centre for these various regeneration projects. But actually, Heligan are also paying this forward, and this year they've been providing some free seed to other farmers or smaller farmers that might just want to give it a go and don't necessarily have the resources or to try that. So we've been able to give the seed away for free as well in small quantities. So this picture here, this is the herbal lay, just as an example of the herbal lays, and I just want to summarise here really. So we've been basically exploring a range of methods to bring biodiversity back to farm. So we got the farm management plan, co-creating those with farmers and looking at these win-win-win-win-wins across the board, like herbal lays or cover crops, and testing out future ideas and future scenarios using our bee steward tool. But we've also been looking at connecting and regenerating species-rich wildflowers through our Meadow Match project, and then looking at wildflowers as a crop and a business opportunity in the region. So overall, really looking at these win-wins for businesses and biodiversity. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. That was a really fascinating talk about the opportunities there are to help pollinators at the moment. Okay, so just a short presentation now from myself, just to give you an overview of the sweep before we have our comfort break. So SWEEP, it stands for the Southwest Partnership for Environment and Economic Prosperity. We are about 4 years into this 5-year programme. It's led by University of Exeter in partnership with the University of Plymouth and Plymouth Marine Laboratory, and it's funded by the Natural and Environment Research Council. SWEEP was set up to work with partners and stakeholders in the southwest of the UK, really to translate and apply science and research to real world challenges and to people who have to need to make management decisions associated with the natural environment. So we're all intimately connected to nature. We all understand that, and we understand that it provides us with everything we need to thrive and survive. However, there's now growing evidence to confirm this, and also crucially, we're also now beginning to understand how important the environment is for our economy. And this slide here just shows you a few facts and figures that I particularly like. So Southwest is an ideal place to trial these kind of new approaches in relation to how we manage our natural environment. It's incredibly rich in natural assets. It's got a long coastline, it's got 2 national parks, it's got many areas of outstanding natural beauty. It's also heavily dependent on sectors such as farming and tourism, hospitality, which themselves are also dependent on the quality of the natural environment. And then against this backdrop, we know this map here that I've just brought up shows the English indices of deprivation from 2019. And in case you can't see the key, the darker the blue, the more deprived the area. And we know the Southwest, when you compare it against to the rest of England or the rest of the UK, there is a significant gap in terms of the general standard of living, productivity and salaries. So it's therefore a great region to be, there's great scope to improve things here, and there's a great need to do things here to level us up with other parts of the country. So what have we been doing on SWEEP, and what have we achieved so far? SWEEP has been designed to work in a very integrated way across all sectors and environments and that are important to the Southwest. And this schematic here just shows you the dots represent different projects and activities we've got going on in SWEEP. But what we do in SWEEP, it would be impossible without partnership and without collaboration. We simply wouldn't be able to deliver our objectives and help provide solutions without our partners. And we have been working with over 200 different organisations, businesses, government and third sector organisations. And here is just a quick flash of logos, just to give you an idea of the sorts of people we've been working with. So after partnership, the next important thing for us in SWEEP is that actually we're all about applying our science and translating it and making it useful for decision makers. How we do that varies according to the needs of the partner. It's often bespoke tools, decision support, modelling, mapping tools, improving capacity development within partners, and developing their learning around relevant topics. So I'll show you more detail on this in the next slide, but SWEEP is really making a difference now in terms of the positive impact it's having on the region's business. We're also proud to be supporting the improvement of people's well-being in the region, which is obviously, we all know through lockdown how important that is, the importance of nature. And as well as that, contributing to some very important agendas such as net zero, levelling up and green growth. Okay, so this last slide just gives you a flavour of some of the projects and work we have been doing on SWEEP. It's quite varied. We've been from improving coastal hazard forecasting, taking a holistic view of water quality through catchment management, and developing novel approaches to managing the marine environment. We have projects in Cornwall, as you've heard from Grace, supporting Cornwall's environmental growth strategy and improving practices to support pollinators. And this is just a snapshot, a very small snapshot of what we've been up to. If you'd like to know any more about what's happening in SWEEP, please check out our website or get in touch. And then finally, this box here just gives you some of the headline benefits that we've delivered on SWEEP so far. We expect a lot more to happen into the future, because changes don't happen overnight, especially when the environment's involved. And there will, of course, be less tangible benefits that come out of sweep that are harder to articulate. But this list is here just to give you an idea of some of the scale of benefits and impact we're making so far on sweep. Okay. Thank you for listening. I hope that gives you more of an idea of what we've been up to in sweep. So it's now time for a short comfort break. Please remember to keep asking your questions on Slido and voting any questions you like, which will be answered soon, first on the list or near the top of the list. And if you could stay connected and rejoin us at approximately 12:05, that would be great. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for returning. I hope you enjoyed the presentations this morning. So we're now going to start asking some questions to the panel. Like I said, please do keep adding them onto Slido and also voting for the ones that you think look most interesting. Okay, so the first question today is for Matt. Matt, so this is from James, and he's asking, is the National Trust helping to advocate for the government to take more immediate and decisive action on climate change?
Yes is the simple answer, and then the process is less simple, I guess. So we're sort of interested and in dialogue constantly with DEFRA and the devolved administrations in this aspect. Obviously, our landholding means we are kind of key player in this with a number of other large landowners. We have an advocacy and policy team that work with this, and specifically on a kind of really wide agenda. And then we also work with a network of other partners, both research and other NGOs in this space. So yeah, it's a really active part, and obviously it's core to our understanding and our business. And so yeah, very much so, James.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so I think this is why maybe everyone on the panel might want to contribute to. What economic model would we use, and how do we build in valuing bees, cover crops, recreational well-being usage as the default for developers, farmers, etc.? Anybody like to go first? Ian?
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that. We've got a new agriculture bill came in last year, and the principle of it is very different to the past. In the past, really, we've subsidised farmers on a per hectare basis, with really very little in the way of environmental constraint or requirement on that payment. Now, the principle is public money for public goods. So the idea that subsidies, that they are from public funds, they should only go for production of those goods that the market won't provide on its own. The market will provide food on its own, when we all pay for it in shops. So really, it's those other things that the market won't provide, like biodiversity, but also addressing climate change and those sort of things. My hope and at the moment expectation, my hopes go up and down, is that indeed that will result in payments for schemes that will improve, amongst other things, biodiversity, and within that bees, and also hopefully recreation and water quality. So this is one area where I feel a little bit more optimistic with regards to the future than what has happened in the past.
Okay, thanks Ian. Ben or Grace, would you like to add anything? Ben?
Yeah, happy to. So I think as kind of Ian's touched upon about the kind of government spending there as well, but there's kind of a fundamental question of what are those values? And so as kind of Ian's initial presentation was talking about, we do have ways to kind of understand what those values are, how people value those things. And as kind of, I think the question's kind of coming at, those values aren't reflected in the kinds of decisions that developers and farmers are potentially making at the moment. And so there's a question of why. Why are developers, and other actors in the economy, let's not just single out developers, but definitely developers. Why are developers' decisions about where to build houses, for instance, not necessarily reflecting the values that people hold for the areas on which they're developing their land? And I think that's kind of this key problem that we kind of refer to about externalities in economics. And so it's really this question of how do we go from the system that we've currently got to a system which reflects those true values. And Ian's been kind of talking about. One approach, obviously, is through government spending, so public money for public goods. But another thing that's going to become essential is regulation. So regulation from the government, which simply states, if you are going to do this thing, you must pay, you must offset it, you must provide those goods that you've taken away in one area, you must provide them in another. And so there's already legislation out there actually for developers in terms of phosphorus. So that's what's driving that Somerset catchment market that I talked about, is this: developers, if they're going to build houses, have to offset the phosphorus that's going to inevitably run out into the watercourse. So that's going to cause harm to people. They have to buy credits from farmers to in the same catchment. They have to be, those farmers will then do activities which reduce the amount of phosphorus running off from their farms. And so I think a key kind of step in terms of unlocking that private finance is to step in and say, actually, the behavior of particular firms is damaging to the wider environment, is going to harm people. And so we have to make them responsible for correcting that.
Okay, thanks. Matt?
Well, I think there's really great points and around public financing and regulation. I think the other thing that some of my previous research has shown is actually a sort of a system appraisal. If you look at this from a sort of a farming perspective, actually a lot of this makes sense economically as well as ecologically. And actually, for some of the stuff where you might develop pollen nectar strips or other habitats for natural pest control, you may anticipate that the area out of production means that actually a big hit on yield impacts. And actually what you can see up to kind of, when we manipulated this and experimentally, is that those reduced input costs, because of the natural benefits that you get from the ecosystem services, more than compensate for yield loss. And actually, the National Trust is also not just in arable systems, but commissioned stuff on pastoral systems, where actually you can see that changing stocking densities, changing stocking rates in different, and being much more aware of landscape context and the carrying capacities of habitats really means there's huge efficiencies within the system that can be appraised. So actually, some of the times this common sense ecological approaches that incorporates these ecosystem services makes more than economic sense in this sense. So that's just an add to those other elements.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, let's move to another question. Okay, so this is another anonymous one. I'd like to know what the panel think in regards to balancing our need for locally produced food with climate change initiatives, forest, peat, meadow restoration, etc. I think we're currently. I don't think we currently got Grace with us. Who would like to kick this one off? Ian? Okay.
Yes, I'm quite keen to answer this, although I worry that people won't like my answer. Everywhere is local to the people that live in it. And I don't believe that simply adding the word local into something necessarily makes it better. We need good approaches to food production, which are producing high quality food, but also looking after the environment. The provenance of that only helps a small group of people, I'm afraid. There's also a lot of misinformation about local food production. There's, the assumption that somehow it will be higher quality and of higher environmental value. I don't see that necessarily being always the case. And then also people say, oh, well, if it's local, it'll be better for the climate because it'll be transported a shorter distance. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily true at all. So, for example, you can have methods of producing food where those methods massively dominate the carbon footprint of that food, and the transport element is really quite minor compared to that. So really my answer would be we need good food production, and that may occur in different places. And yes, there is no doubt that there are some benefits to local economies, but remember, what you think is local is what somebody else thinks is far away, and the government has to be fair in that respect. So I'm not as keen on the local tag, particularly if it supplants more relevant tags such as environmentally sustainable.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Matt, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, I can sort of add and not disagree, but I think the general principles of shorter supply chains and circularity, increasing circularity in systems, is one that it's hard to disagree with. But as Ian says, it's the right supply chain, right circularity in the right place. It's what's clear is across our landscapes that the capability and capacity of landscapes to deliver various goods and services varies. And it's really about what the desirable balance we want from any particular parcel or landscape there. So that's really it. I agree in principle. Just because we call it local, it doesn't mean it's better, because everyone's local somewhere. But I think there are broad principles, and taking a wider look, that wider landscape look, and the capacity issues that Ian's alluded to is really, really important.
Okay, thanks. I think we'll move on to another question. Okay. Is there any initiative to ensure woodlands are planted as part of new housing schemes? I don't know if Grace, how you feel about that one. You haven't answered yet, but do you go? Oh, not sure. Ian, would you like to take that one?
I'd be delighted.
Yeah.
So there are schemes coming through as part of the Environment Bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment. The idea here is that certain types of development, I personally think it should be all types of development, but certain types at the moment, should compensate for the impact that they have on the environment. And by compensate, I actually mean not just restore in a physical sense, but actually produce a better outcome at the end. At the moment, it's likely that that compensation will only focus on biodiversity. That's unfortunate, because there are many other aspects of the environment as well. But even there, I think there's a very important issue that I think is getting overlooked here. Insisting that this compensation should be as close as possible to the site of the damage, if you like, sounds a really good idea, but it has really bad consequences when you actually put it into practice. First of all, it means that actually we say we're compensating for biodiversity, but actually we're just compensating for people. In particular, we're trying to reward people who've just bought new homes and the like. We're not actually compensating for the people that lost the land that they used to recreate on before, and we're not targeting that compensation on the best places for biodiversity. And that's very, very unlikely to be right next to a massive new housing estate. It's much more likely to be in places that, for example, bridge between existing conservation areas, so that wild species can actually travel from one place to another. And we move from the sort of disparate collection of conservation sites that we have into a network that is actually meaningful for wild species. So it's the idea of net gain compensation is great, but the devil really is in the detail. And if we allow the simple knee jerk of saying, "Oh, it's got to be as close as possible," we will actually be putting again humans above nature and actually compensating human winners rather than looking after the losers in terms of wild species.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to add to that? Should we move on?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think that while the principle's nice, the devil is absolutely in the detail here. Delivery is key, and from a spatial extent, I completely agree. I mean, a very influential report by John Lawton a while ago talked about how it's important that things are bigger, better, and more joined up. We've learned the lessons from the past, and really what we're trying to look is holistic landscapes that encompass nature and space for those other things. I guess there are bits where actually planning, it's not just driven by biodiversity. There are additional benefits from trees in terms of cooling, air quality, and those are other considerations that we make in this whole thing. So, but that's about how we plan. I think the other thing here is also just planting a tree isn't sufficient to maintain a tree, and that long-term custodianship of anything that we produce in if we go with net gain is really, really important as well, and important to configure in those design phases. So yeah.
Ben, did you have something else to add?
So I totally agree with absolutely everything that Matt and Ian have just said on it. I think the key in terms of being specific about the detail is being very specific about what services you're trying to replace. This is kind of what Ian was talking about. Are you looking to replace biodiversity? Are you looking to replace the recreation? Are you looking to replace the kind of other ecosystem services that they're providing? Water quality, carbon, recreation. What is it specifically that you're trying to replace? And to be clear, I think if you're serious about net gain, you're trying to get all of those services. Of course, as Ian has said, those services don't need to be replaced in exactly the same location that they're taken from. They should be put in the places where they're going to be the best serve kind of the communities that they're in. And I think just to kind of highlight, there's obviously the other side of it as well. There's the costs of where do you then want these services to go, these land use changes that you're requiring and offsets to go, because it's not free to take land out of production. It's not free to take land out of areas that would otherwise be turned into, say, high value housing estates either. So we have to be very well aware of the costs as well as the benefits side of this. And I think there's a real role, obviously, for some form of market intermediary, because at that stage you can aggregate these different demands from different developers for different services and aggregate those at the same time as aggregating the potential supply of these different landowners who can, as kind of Matt's been talking about, convert their land into things that will that will generate these services and kind of be custodians of them into the long term as well, into the future as well. So you just those synergies that can kind of be unlocked by having someone sat in the middle. It doesn't really matter who that person is, but they're massive, and so just that really.
Great, thank you. Very full response there, I think. Okay, Grace, are you with us? No, doesn't look like it. Okay. Let's. Oh. Okay, let's just. Okay, let's have a look at some.
Either Grace or the cat.
Okay. Let's look at next question then, which is where should we be planting trees to help deliver net zero? Who wants to go first?
Well, Ian ought to go first.
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is definitely my number one interest in research. Yeah, and so although actually what I'm going to do is actually say Ben's previous answer is the correct answer here. You know, look at the services that you will obtain by planting trees. Typically there's two things that are really focused on with regard to where to plant. That's what tree and what location. The what tree, in a way, we've known about what tree for a very long time, and it depends again what services you want. If you are just interested in obtaining timber, then there's a number of exotic, as in non-native, conifer species that will knock out timber in this country at a phenomenal rate. Because of the climatic conditions here, trees grow incredibly fast. But we want woodlands for multiple reasons. Yes, timber, but also carbon storage, uh, provision of habitats, um, trying to regulate flood risk, providing recreation, and all of those overpower the timber benefits dramatically. And that means that if you're looking across the whole piece, then actually there's some very good reasons to be planting native species. Not least because although they're slower growing than the conifers, they produce high density hardwood, which can then go into housing and actually lock that carbon up for a really long time. But where you plant is the big determinant, because trees change the land. So planting on peatlands is absolutely the wrong thing to do, because the amounts of greenhouse gases that you'll produce will never be matched by the amounts that are stored in the trees. You've also have got to think about what's being displaced. So it does no service to the cause of planting woodlands to ignore the fact that if you plant trees on an area, it'll probably produce less food than before. We can produce the amounts of food that we're producing at the moment by just shifting a lot of our production. So there isn't going to be a trade-off in the end in terms of people running short of food if we plant trees, but we have to address that face on. And when we do that, we find then there's loads of places where the benefits in terms of all the things that I mentioned overwhelm other costs associated with it, so that we should be planting in those locations. Where are they? There's plenty of locations in the southwest. There's plenty of locations right the way through Britain, and they're places that maximise that sum of benefits. So we should be planting more trees around cities because of the recreational benefits, and in cities as well. We should be planting in places where biodiversity is going to benefit from that, where they will reduce flooding for people living downstream. There's lots of great locations, but this is a complex issue, and we have to look at all of these different factors before deciding. Simple rules, so I've heard really very senior people just saying, oh, well, all we'll do is we'll plant on low-grade agricultural land. There's no guarantee at all that is the right place to be planting trees. So it is a more complex question, but we have the tools to answer it.
Great, thanks, Ian. I might try and get a question for Grace while she's here. So next one is, how do we get businesses to contribute to environmental improvement, and how do we unlock private sector funding?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, but I think understanding and then really sharing the information that we have, or case studies about where those things come hand in hand, like some businesses that we're working with. You've got the environmental benefits and the business benefits that absolutely intertwined, and as a business grows, so does the environment, and vice versa. So I think it's understanding those and having more case studies and really pushing that out, and whether we can get more funding to support businesses that are doing those things. And can you repeat that? What was the final bit of that question, Dawn? Was it about private funding?
Yeah, how do we unlock private sector funding?
Yeah, I can't answer that question. I don't have a straight answer for that. It's so complicated, and so many. I mean, I think obviously you can sort of pay per ecosystem services or natural capital gain, but the private sector thing, I'm going to have to just can't. I don't feel like I have to answer that. It's so complex. Yeah.
Anybody else want to add? Ben?
So I think, as Grace has kind of already highlighted, businesses do contribute in all sorts of ways already, right? So Grace has been talking about farmers who are prepared to plant things that are good for biodiversity and good for the wider environment on their land because of the private benefits as well as those public goods that they're producing. Obviously, as we kind of, I'm sure all aware, there are cases in which the thing that's best for the private individual is not what's best for society as a whole. And in those cases, we're obviously going to have to potentially pay people to do things. And so then the question is where that money is coming from. And I think that kind of links to this. The second half of this question is how on earth do we get to those kind of private financing things? And so I think one of the really kind of key things in terms of getting business to contribute, obviously some businesses are going to contribute because their consumers care, but realistically that's going to be quite a small number of businesses, and it's going to be quite small amounts of funding that we're actually talking about. The way that we get businesses to be involved is that we say if you're damaging the environment, you must offset it. You must take responsibility for the impacts that you're having on the wider environment. So we're seeing that, for instance, with developers already, right? So the regulation now is in place that if you want to go ahead with development and it's going to have an impact on downstream areas of particular importance to biodiversity, you must offset the nutrients that's going to be going into those areas. And so now we're seeing developers already contributing to getting or already funding to getting those kinds of schemes off the ground, which will enable reductions in nutrient reduction elsewhere so that they can go ahead with their development. So that's one thing in terms of regulation. I think the second thing is about innovation. So it's about the fact that when we plant trees, as we've kind of talked about, or any other kind of sort of restoration that we're kind of thinking about, there are a whole range of ecosystem services that are generated. And at the moment, if someone wants to come in and buy, for instance, some kind of nutrient reduction, they have to pay for the whole whack. They have to pay for all of that land use change. They have to pay for the whole costs, because at the moment we don't have mechanisms which allow us to do what's called stacking these payments. So for farmers to take payments for that nutrient reduction and for the carbon emissions that are going to be, or the carbon sequestration that goes on, and also for the recreation. So we need to look at those kinds of schemes that will allow for stacked payments for these what are called bundled goods. And their businesses are already actually leading the way, right? So I talked about the fact that we're working with Entrade on this Somerset catchment market. They're actually at the cutting edge of this, and they already have schemes in place that as soon as kind of government policy allows, that's ready to go, basically. That can straight away go out and allow for these kinds of stacked payments to farmers, allowing different sorts of stakeholders to buy just the goods that they need. And so, although that's not going to unlock more private financing, that's not what's happening there, it is going to mean that private financing goes further, that you're able to get more land use change, and at the same time be paying farmers more for the individual actions that they're taking. So you're going to get more service generated, more land use change, and farmers are going to be happier as well. So I think the other way that businesses can really contribute here is through that innovation on that kind of financing side.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for yeah, Matt, did you want to add?
Well, I guess the sense of the question is, how do we get them to contribute? I just kind of wanted to make it really fundamental that, you know, nature is without doubt our most precious asset. Okay, so it's absolutely fundamental. Okay, it's not a choice really, and we've massively mismanaged that kind of portfolio so far. So I can kind of think that's the baseline, right? And I'd agree with all those other mechanisms. I guess the other thing is that from a kind of practitioner or business wanting to do the right thing at the moment, you can be, and especially with farmers, a kind of rabbit in the headlight with the number of tools that and approaches to some of these questions. And really, I think it's behaving on the kind of research community, interacting and co-designing with those practitioners to make sure it's much easier to integrate those plausible kind of options for biodiversity renewal into those business and investment decisions. And it's not more stuff we need to generate, it's at the consolidation of those ideas and those tools to really powerfully get everyone on the same page. Because after all, what we're after is collectively a kind of behavioural change. Everyone wants to do the right thing, and we've got to make it easier and enable them to do it. That's the only add I would give on that.
Okay, great. We've probably got time for one or two more questions, so let's have a look. Okay, how does the National Trust's approaches on farming and nature link to climate change?
Do I need to take that first then?
Yes, please, sorry.
Yes. Sorry, Dawn, that was facetious. I guess from this point of view, I mean, some of the things I've talked about already are really important here. I guess, you know, our commitments here are around thinking about how we farm and link systems and agroecological systems and bring together those best things that contribute not only to nature benefits but also have positive impacts on climate. And some of the things that Grace was talking about in terms of some of the options that we've developed with agri-environment schemes and building on those are key here. I think there's about also that the nature-friendly farming approaches that we're taking and really proactively taking, and part of that is co-design, part of that is innovation, and part of that is education and knowledge exchange. Really, I think the composite of those things and also the appropriate planning within the landscape capacities that we have are critical. It's a multifaceted question though, and answer.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think probably just one more question. And the two most popular ones are both the National Trust, Matt, so I'm going to come to you again. There's a question about engaging the public on your themes that you talked about in your presentation. And there's also one about inclusion with your training of your volunteers. I don't know if you could comment on either of those.
Yeah, I mean, well, yes, comment. I'm trying to remember what you just said. Sorry. So inclusion and, sorry, what was the other one?
Engaging public on your strategy, I guess, and your themes. Yeah,
okay. Well, those are key parts. So firstly, visit the National Trust website, and there's stacks of stuff there. It's an absolute raison d'etre for us. Okay, inclusion is written into kind of our DNA. Everyone is welcome. We're doing this for everyone and for the long term, and that's absolutely a critical point. We realised more than ever, I think, after this last couple of years, the value of these nature places and our places to the widest possible communities, and we're really actively engaged in embracing and allowing access from all sectors. So definitely that. We have actually a whole team working on inclusion, and we also have whole sections working on engagement. And I think our engagement is really, really wide-ranging at multiple levels, from kind of the research stuff that we're doing with Exeter all the way down to kind of families and individuals and children's.
Great, thanks. Okay, so before we draw this session to a close, I'm just going to ask each of the panel to give a short closing statement about what they've talked about today. So we'll go in the same order as the presentations, if that's okay. So Matt, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, I guess I've really enjoyed this session. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the debate. It's been really useful. And I would say, you know, if you are interested in what we've got to say and what we're doing, then kind of have a look at our website, visit some of our places, become a member and become part of the journey. I think the really important thing from today is that we're embedding a lot of our decisions and based on that around the importance of dealing and addressing with climate change and the biodiversity crisis. That's the core of our long-term strategy. And to do that, we're committed to delivering that through nature renewal, nature-based solutions, land use change, and improving that partnership working to underpin some of so that we can base everything on evidence. Engagement is absolutely key. We want to include people as far as and widely as possible to reconnect with nature, especially underrepresented socioeconomic cultural groups. And we are fully focused on practice-based and solutions-focused. We're really doers, and we're keen to do. So more than happy for people to come and be part of that journey.
Thank you very much. Ian.
Thank you. I've also really enjoyed this. Thanks for the opportunity. I want to stress that the major challenges facing the world, things like climate change, biodiversity loss, green growth, they're all complex. But we now have the knowledge and increasingly the tools to make better decisions. Not perfect decisions, but better decisions. What we need then is the will to actually use that knowledge and incorporate it into decision making. We need our political representatives to step up, but they won't unless they actually realise that this is what people want as well. So every one of us has got a role to play in making clear to our representatives that this is the future that we need and want. So please do step up, play your own part, and actually try and move us along the road towards a more sustainable future.
Call to arms. Thanks, Ian. I think we'll need to go to Ben next.
Yeah, so thanks very much for joining. Obviously, really enjoy being a part of this whole discussion. So I'm probably going to finish on quite an optimistic note, actually, and say Ian's obviously right. We need to keep pushing our representatives forward and on this agenda, but I think there's progress. I think we're moving in the right direction in terms of we're seeing this move to public goods, but public money for public goods, and we're seeing it in combination with an increase in kind of regulation on sectors which are damaging to the environment, that they must kind of take responsibility for those kinds of impacts. I think this will lead to kind of serious growth in schemes over the next kind of 5 to 10 years that are tackling these environmental problems that we're facing, be that climate change, be this the biodiversity emergency. And at the same time, as that funding comes in, I think we're going to see innovation in how these schemes are organised, and that's going to mean that we're going to see massive growth in terms of scheme impact. So we're going to be able to get a whole lot more land use change for the same sorts of budgets. And that's going to be really important if we're to meet the kind of challenges that we're definitely going to start facing over the next kind of decade or more.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Nice positive end. Apologies, we can't hear from Grace again. I'm afraid she's lost connection. So it's just leaves me to sort of officially draw this session to a close. Thank you very much to our presenters and to all the audience who've joined us today and have provided us with some very thought-provoking and interesting questions to discuss. The recording of this will be available in due course, so if you want to revisit anything, then please do. So thanks again, and goodbye.